This computer. Excellent. Okay, so the thing I'm itching to talk with you about the most is imagining we go back 12,000 years and it's the golden age, or the end of the golden age. And the consciousnesses of the people back then, after spending however many years in the golden age, because it's like it's not equal portions of time that the ages, right? Like the golden age is a long period of time.
It is the longest, yes.
Yeah. So what it's like to live in that consciousness, or be born into that consciousness, and then be born at the time when that consciousness is going to be in decline, and presumably the people at the time would know this, and potentially, like Göbekli Tepe, like we talked about last time, intentionally build and then bury something as a time capsule, because they know 12,000 years later we'll be where we're at and have the capacity mentally to begin to understand the things that they take for granted as normal life back then. And the subsequent decline in consciousness that takes place all the way down through until 500 years ago, when we reach the bottom of that, or 1500 years ago, when it's the bottom of like the lowest point in consciousness before we start to come back up again. And just, that's kind of the general thing I'm excited to talk about. There's a lot there, but.
Well, where in that arc do you want to start? You want to start in Satyayuga?
Yeah, just the idea of like the people, they talk about, the stories talk about Atlantis and the great fall of Atlantis, because the people achieved such a high level of understanding and technology, and I guess hubris, and pride and all these things come in and lead to their eventual destruction. They are the cause of their own destruction. That's the story anyway. But it speaks to the beginning of the decline in the consciousness, even if it's just this tiny little amount that leads to this worldwide destruction, which to me makes sense given the access they have to the power and like awareness of spirit, and what it must have been like then.
Well, I think a number of things that might surprise people about Satyayuga is, one, I don't think they were interested in technology. I don't think they needed technology to make their lives work. I think there was a relatively small population of people on the earth at that time. And because they had these advanced spiritual powers, they really didn't need to farm. They didn't really need to build structures. I think that it really was much more Edenic than we, anything we know of in our time, where you really could just live off the land, or if you had these advanced powers, you may not even need to eat as much. The advanced yogis can go without eating for long periods of time because they can draw in life force directly from the cosmos. They don't need the kind of indirect way in which food gives us life force. So I think it would have been a time where building things was rare. So I think Göbekli Tepe was rare. And of course, it's the only major thing we know about from that time. So it may have been unique that they actually built something. But I think what their real message to us from that time came down through scriptures like the Vedas. And there's some what's called archaeoastronomical evidence. So in the Vedas, which are in Sanskrit, we know them today as written tomes, but they began their existence as an oral tradition. But in the Vedas, there are descriptions of astronomical events that can be described really very specifically in modern day astronomical terms, because not only did the ancient Vedas, the rishis, the people of that Satyayuga, know about astrology, they also had both phases through which the sun moved, which are the signs of the zodiac, but they also had lunar signs that there are 29 of them. They're known as the nakshatras.
Mm.
And each nakshatra has a specific star that's associated with. So there's something known as the Atri's solar eclipse described in the Vedas that uses both of those reference points. Well, 3 reference points, really. It talks about what sign of the zodiac it was in at that time, therefore having to do with sunrise and sunset, against the background of stars. And then in what nakshatras the sun was rising and falling. And then, of course, an eclipse. So with all that information, an astronomer, a NASA astronomer, kind of dialed his program backwards and looked for when would those alignments have been happening in the full moon, and what therefore would the date have been. And he said that it had to have been at least 4300 BC, which is considerably older than what most mainstream historians and archaeologists think was the early dates of Sanskrit and the Vedas. And then there was another study done, a similar kind, using a similar kind of story from the Vedas, that actually took it all the way back to 7300 BC, another 3,000 years almost later. So if either one of those is true, it tells us that the Vedas are far older than understood. And even if they weren't written down until the early part of descending Dwapara, when other languages began to be written down with cuneiform and papyri, et cetera, that was kind of when writing was born, but not necessarily when language was born or when oral traditions supporting those languages were born. And there's another support for the notion that Sanskrit's oral tradition goes way back, which is that it has a very elaborate error-correcting oral recitation system that, in the simplest way to describe it, there are 10 different ways that you can recite every line, every shloka in the Vedas. And only one of them makes sense to us in a meaningful way. The other 9 are meant to eliminate any errors that might have crept in to the way in which it was said at one time, right?
Yeah.
So by having this error correction system, Sanskrit is believed to be accurate completely, with the exception of maybe 1 or 2 words, in today's form compared to when it was begun. So if that's 6700 BC or 7000 BC, we're talking about a language that spans the end of Satya Yuga and is all the way still being used today. And it's considered the most accurate language on the planet. That the grammar and syntax of Sanskrit are so precise and so complicated that it allows a really well-versed person in the language to say things in a way that has no ambiguity. Almost every language has ambiguity. We have in English, we're famous for ambiguity because we can say the exact same word and have 2 different meanings. And you only make sense of it because you're aware of the ambiguity and your brain just immediately goes, oh, he must have meant But with Sanskrit, there is no ambiguity built into the language. So it has been looked at by computer programmers to understand how it could be so precise and to apply that to the development of program languages. So it's a remarkable language, and it's old. It's also a spiritual language. It has the most nuanced vocabulary for describing spiritual states of awareness of any language on earth. And so this would seem sort of obvious if you, it's a sacred language. It was used to create the Vedas, and therefore it had to have this vocabulary, but it was created to write the Vedas. It wasn't created to be a general purpose language. It was created to be this very precise way of describing spiritual truths. So you put all these things together, and it makes, to me, a lot of sense that it probably was conceived in Satya Yuga, and probably in that last 1,000 or so years, and that it, more than a building like Göbekli Tepe, is probably the legacy of Satya Yuga that we have, that tells us not only about Satya Yuga, but about the deep truths that were understood in Satya Yuga. So I think if you're going to look for a time capsule, I'd say it's Sanskrit, and that the knowledge inherent in those, just the Rig Veda has 10,000 couplets, and they're known as, hymns that you can sing. It was meant to be chanted from its inception, and so they are not only full of intrinsic knowledge, as we think of knowledge and me being able to describe something to you, but also knowledge in the sense that when you use them as chants, they're spiritually empowering. They're spiritually an embedded wisdom in them that goes far beyond just the meaning of the words. But as you can tell, I love Sanskrit as a concept. It also had no proto-language.
Yeah.
Sanskrit came forward fully fledged and appeared as this perfect language to convey spiritual truth. So this all fits with the notion that Satya Yuga was a very high spiritual age, and that the teachers alive, and probably most anyone alive in that age, had a high enough awareness of spiritual truth to want to pass those on and create this oral tradition that maintained its integrity through time.
Thank you. Appreciate that history. I know a little bit about Sanskrit, but not all the things that you shared. I agree, and I love it as a piece of evidence for what I was also wanting to talk about, which is this decline in consciousness, this long, slow decline in awareness of our kind of true nature, or whatever true is, because we spend seemingly half of the time in this state. So this is part of our true nature too. But this other version of us that is just completely connected at all times seems to be more authentic and real, what we really are. And I can't remember if we talked about this last time or not, but I talk about this all the time when I want to talk about this point, which is the structures around the world, like Baalbek and Sacsayhuaman, and even the pyramids in Egypt, that the oldest constructions are the most sophisticated.
Right.
And it's a clear, obvious, it's like a child can see it, kind of obviousness to the decline as become closer to the present moment, until, say, a few thousand or a few hundred years ago, in terms of the ability of humans to conceptualize these types of projects on these scales with these levels of nuance. And like you were saying, there's more than, it's like the building is singing the wisdom to us with the way it's constructed. especially Saxoyama, and then these weird oblong shapes that the rocks
Right.
fit into and all of that. It's more than just it's not like it's a very efficient way to build, but that's not the only reason it's art. And it's also wisdom that they're conveying just in those shapes somehow. Maybe at the right
Right.
frequency, we understand it as a language.
And the walls and constructions that were made that way are the oldest part of all the
Yeah.
structures in South America. Yeah.
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 And just like Sanskrit being the oldest and it doesn't have a proto language, which means that the people who, quote unquote invented it or decided to write it down for the first time and make it written already understand all the concepts so that they could do so. It's not like they had a trial and error situation where they developed it at that time. It was potentially developed long time previous, or who knows how far back before they realized maybe we got to write this stuff down because the people aren't going to be able to stay connected to it with their level of consciousness. So it has to be put in physical form for them to remember. And it's just to remember, just stay with us through this decline, because on the other side, you'll come back. Just make it through the
Hang
dark.
on to this for 12,000 years. And
Yeah.
yeah, no, it's amazing. And it also speaks to the fact that I think spiritual enlightenment brings with it an astonishing level of intelligence that would allow someone to conceive an entire language in all its, complexity and its grammar and its syntax and its vocabulary, all as a perfect, finished whole, just bringing it out of the mind and into voice.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's obviously the most sophisticated of the languages, like you're saying. The ones that came after are reflections of its sophistication and becoming less sophisticated until, even though in its own way, I guess English is an amazing art form because of the things like there's many words that sound the same and hidden, silent letters. And I don't know, there's something about English that could be arguably the worst of all languages, but also the best in some ways. It's an interesting, weird thing.
Well, it's a mongrel.
Yeah.
It's 27 different species of dog combined into one language.
Yeah. So it's weird. But anyway, I digress. Yeah, the other thing about that you speak about in the book is just the nature of pantheons being a worldwide understanding of the god, as multiple gods versus just a single god. But then as we came down further in consciousness, again, just sort of like they can't conceive of multiple gods anymore. It's just too much for the mind at that level of consciousness. And so just the idea of that there is a God, it's just one God, even though there's a Trinity there, somehow it's just one God, just hold on to the idea of God and don't lose all hope. And it's interesting how atheism sort of emerged seemingly as a result of being in the Dark Age, because there's not like a huge history of atheism in the world history, the written record. It's a newer idea.
No, it's true. It's a modern idea.
Yeah.
Well, there's an important distinction I like to make about there having been one God in Satya Yuga and one God in Kali Yuga, is that people knew that they were part of the one infinite God in Satya Yuga.
Yeah.
But in Kali Yuga, that one God is removed from us, far, far away, unapproachable, unreachable, and certainly we are not, according to the major monotheistic religions, we're not high beings at all in that conception. We are the servile creatures of this vast, intelligent God, an all-powerful God. So it's not really the one God conception in any way similar to Satya Yuga.
No. Yeah.
Satya Yuga, people were trying to become self-realized, to know that they were one with God. By the time we got down to Kali Yuga, that wasn't even a thought that could happen.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just some vague character in the clouds that's judging you your whole life. It's outside of
Yes.
you. It's not, there's no, the idea that the inner monologue is not observed and interacted with by God at all times, that we're just in our own mind and that's it, just me. No one can hear my thoughts. There's no connection to the universe.
No, we're just smart animals.
Yeah, yeah. But that's the thing that's, to me, at least for me, and a lot of the people that, I've observed along my journey, that it seems there's a reconnection to an awareness of like the things we talked about last time related to synchronicities and um, how an idea comes through the mind and leads us along a path, that ends up in a spiritual journey. Um,
Yeah. Well, our age is not particularly spiritual, but it's definitely going to give us more awareness than we would have had in Kali Yuga. So
yeah,
I think people are, I may have covered this last time, I'm not remembering, but I mean, I think the real gift of Dwapara Yuga as we're coming into it is awareness of subtle energy,
mm,
is that we are aware of life force inside our bodies, which I don't think we would have been in Kali Yuga. I think it
yeah,
would have been limited just to thinking of our bodies as, just material things, where
mm,
we have both support from um, science's view of all of matter being basically energy as a kind of foundation point for us to think about what we are, but we also have direct personal experience of life force that allows us to, I think, be more aware that we're much more than we know. We're much more than just physical bodies and uh, limited to material means.
yeah. And I think, like we talked about last time, plant medicines can help us connect into that and kind of ground that awareness foundationally so that it's not fleeting. Um, Certainly my experiences with mushrooms, but also other plant medicines, cannabis, even when I look at it the right way, when I approach it the right way, uh, expands that more and more for me as a tool.
Yeah. Well, you get out of your normal firing circuits in your brain, and it's those habitual patterns of circuits that connect you to thoughts and feelings and meaning and words and physical movements, all the things that the brain does that's helpful to us. And if we didn't have that ability, we wouldn't be able to function in this world. But all those things tend to be self-reinforcing. So we just stay in them all the time. We get up, we stay in physical bodily awareness all day long. We do things, then we go to bed and we start over the next day. Where, as you were saying, these experiences where you're on a hallucinogenic drug are super expansive because all those normal keep you occupied in physical sensory awareness are either damped down or stopped. And when that happens, it's as if you suddenly can look up and look around and see a whole other world that's always there. It's always accessible to us, but we're just so focused on the other because of the way our brain is been wired by ourselves, that we don't get it. So meditation can also do that. Hallucinogenic drugs can do that. I think that the power of meditation in comparison to hallucinogenic drugs is that it gradually rewires your brain.
Mm.
So if you do it every day, your brain gets rewired to have those kind of subtle experiences without the need for the kind of a, dramatic, extraordinary experience.
Yeah, I appreciate that distinction because there's a TED talk that I don't remember the guy's last name, but his first name is Andy, and he's studying as a monk, but he's doing a short 10-minute TED talk where he's talking about meditation, and he's using juggling balls as a prop.
Uh-huh.
And he does a great job, in my opinion, of kind of expressing the opportunity we have with meditation as a practical tool for life versus just something that we do for a few minutes to, to detach whatever, like there's different ways that people perceive meditation.
Right.
And ultimately what he discovered, and this is something that I can't remember if I told you, but I manage a float spa. So I get to float, which is sensory isolation chamber,
Right.
and it's like an amazing tool for meditation because it makes things so much easier for focusing on the witness state and leaving the body as a vehicle of distraction, essentially,
Yeah.
But he talks about that kind of what he realized after going hardcore. Not everybody's going to become a Buddhist monk, but this was the road he took. And what he gained from that experience was the awareness of, that yes, all these things they say about meditation are true, but for him, what became usable to change his life was the witness state, and then taking the witness state and taking it out of the abstract, only achieved in this, this state only achieved as a result of closing our eyes and getting into a meditative state, but actually pulling it back into his, more or less sober consciousness where his eyes are open and he's interacting with the world, but he's still maintaining the witness state while his eyes are open, essentially. And I love that as a way to reframe meditation for me, because like many people, when I started to think about starting meditation, I had a lot of blockages, baggage from words and, stereotypes and all that stuff, just at that stage of my journey. But when I got in the float tank and I'm laying there and I have the realization that it doesn't matter whether my eyes are open or closed, I can't see anything as if my eyes are closed. So why not try meditating with my eyes open while I'm in the float tank? And then my nerdy kind of left brain way of thinking about it is that this might start helping some of the neural pathways rewire so that I can keep that state keep it more consistently with my eyes open out there when there is stimulation occurring. So I've found that actually be helpful in that regard. Floating can help a lot of different things, but as a way to bring the meditative state into the present so that we stay present as much as possible throughout the day, and not only present, but discerning of everything that we have the opportunity to discern so that we make the best choice for ourselves and others, especially with challenging moments. Yeah.
I think that, as you say, there are so many different ways to look at meditation and to practice meditation. And I don't always kind of, put forward my own, but in this context, it might be helpful to share that in my approach, which is, coming from the path of Paramahansa Yogananda, one of the aims of meditation is to connect to spirit and to feel the presence. And what I find is that if I connect to presence deeply in a meditation, that I definitely continue to feel it throughout the day. And I can lose it, but I can also hang on to it. And what I'm hanging on to is not eyes closed, isolated from the senses, but it's feeling this deep calmness in my core, in my heart. And it brings with it clarity of mind. I'm very creative or more creative when I'm in that state. And yet, as you were saying about yourself and your description of the juggler, I'm active, I'm moving my body around, I'm using the sense stays with me as I go through my day. And for me, the best way to get there is to make that connection inwardly to a responsive divine friend God, that when I make that connection in that sort of personal way, I feel the most saturated by it, and I go the most deeply into it, and that is the longest lasting, rather than just calming my mind in the abstract or calming my body in motionlessness, but really immersing myself in higher consciousness, in higher feeling. That carries through into my day the most effectively.
Appreciate that. Yeah. Yeah, I study the Mayan calendar for this reason, because it's intricately weaving all these different concepts together in this fabric that reveals spirit in every way possible.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's the same with, I started choosing to listen to just different music that seems to resonate at that frequency. It keeps me more in awareness of my relationship with spirit, or what spirit's trying to say in this moment as a fly goes by my ear, that kind of thing. So it's the place, not just being in the present moment, but being calm and centered and peaceful and feeling secure, especially when things are seemingly intense on the outside. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's when you learn that it doesn't matter what's going on outside you. And that, as they say, happiness is an inside job. If you can get your awareness centered in, heartfelt, positive feelings, then life just happens. It doesn't, pull you up, crash you down, pull you up, crash you down, because you're not identifying with it. You're functioning within it, I think, with greater ability, not less ability. But you're not, life isn't happening to you. you're just letting it come, and you're letting it go.
It's not, no more victim mentality.
Right.
Yeah.
And victim mentality can only come when you have single word for it, but outer happiness mentality. If you're looking for everything to be as you would like it to be in order for you to feel like you can be happy, then that sets you up for being the victim when it doesn't happen right the way you want it to happen. And it's only because you get attached to it and want it, rely on it, train yourself that you must have it, that it takes that power over you.
Yeah, just not having an expectation of what the day is going to bring, and then when it does bring something that the ego resists, to just smile as best as we can, right? Do our best to ride that wave.
You can have expectations. You can have Yogananda said something that surprised me, but I've thought about it a lot over the years. He said, before I begin my day, I meditate on everything that I want to try to do that day. And then I go forward empowered to do that. So it's not just a meander through life where you don't care what the next thing is you're doing.
Yeah.
It is moving forward through life with purpose, with meaning. But when you encounter things that make that more difficult or more challenging, or are higher priority for you, like somebody needs your help, then you help. So it's this tricky balance of willing forward in your life, but being sensitive on a feeling and awareness level to how you do that at any given moment. I think it's the most challenging balance. As another thing Yogananda said is that the spiritual path is like walking on a tightrope while juggling. That there's, it takes really being centered, but you also have to really concentrate to juggle, right?
Yeah.
It's not just being centered so you don't fall off. You also have to be able to use your mind, use your creativity, use your will to juggle your way through a life.
Yeah. Love that metaphor. Yeah. Delicate dance.
Yep.
And then where we are potentially in this time of the cycle is these upheaval moments, and the normal dance doesn't apply anymore. And now it's like a dance of chaos almost.
Uh-huh. When you have major dramatic changes taking place in your life.
Yeah. And embracing that, as I may have said this last time, I say this quote all the time, but Saint Francis of Assisi said that it was easy for him to see God in beautiful things, but the lessons of deeper knowledge taught him to see God in all things.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, seeing God in the challenges. Yeah. That can be quite a challenge, I guess.
Yeah, I think, for me, in the terminology that I have grown used to over the years in Yogananda's teachings, for me, it's been the process of learning what non-attachment is. So a lot of times when I hear people talk about non-attachment, what they're describing is indifference. And Yogananda was very clear that you shouldn't be indifferent about your life.
Yeah.
It's your life, it's your mission, it's your journey, and this is an opportunity for you to grow and make spiritual progress. So it isn't a matter of just not caring what happens to you, because we should make every effort to use our will to accomplish the things we want to accomplish. But when we can't, or in that moment we can't, that's when non-attachment helps us. Because otherwise we get depressed or angry or upset that what we've set our will on is not happening the way we want to. And in those major upheavals, nothing goes the way we plan, right? I mean, I was in an auto accident, ended up in the hospital for a couple of weeks, and then I was an invalid for 2 or 3 months. And so everything that I had been doing up until that time, I couldn't do.
Yeah.
But I was deeply grateful for the fact that I had developed some degree of non-attachment, so that I wasn't thinking, this is wrong. This is not what should be happening. This is not the right thing for me. I didn't fight it. I just went with it and flowed with it. Again, I just had to shift kind of using my will for. I had to change what my goals were. And when I got up in the morning, I had a different set of goals than I did before the accident.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't consider what I might like to be doing if I hadn't had the accident. It was just unfruitful to think that way. It didn't help to think that way. I just had to be in the not so much the moment, which gets a little cliched, but I had to be in my life as it was,
Mm-hmm.
and do the best I could with it.
Yeah, not resist what was, resist reality.
Right.
There's a spiritual speaker named Matt Kahn that during one of his talks talked about how the ego is more than happy to go along with the divine plan as long as the divine plan goes the way the ego wants it to. But then the moment
Right.
plan turns a different direction, the ego goes from being perfectly happy to perfectly angry.
Right.
That. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it can be very, very deep. I mean, there are a lot of people who lose a loved one and they never forgive God. They never can release that into it's part of a divine plan. And I'm part of that divine plan.
Yeah.
But that the whole idea of God must be wrong,
Mm-hmm.
because otherwise I would still have my loved one. So that resistance to loss and deep change like that is a big challenge in kind of maintaining and working with one's spiritual life.
I feel like that's one of the things that mushrooms in particular helped me with. And I think that's what a lot of the research indicates with people that are taking it at end of life situations. They lose their fear of death because they realize, and they lose their fear of losing others to death because they realize that death is an illusion, or at least seems that way.
Yeah.
So, yeah, again, just what it must be like, what it will be like into the next age. And then as we go into the silver and then the gold age, I mean, I often think about also that, you know, the potential for us to not actually even be physical beings during that time, and maybe we become physical again as we decline in consciousness, and that's maybe another reason why there's not much to see, because we're maybe quasi physical interacting with the earth totally different in a way that we can't even conceive of right now, you know.
Yeah. Yogananda said that about Satya Yuga, that the he didn't say just the advanced beings, but he said that people in Satya Yuga can see into the astral.
Mm.
So the realms beyond the physical, which are, as he also put it, hiding behind space,
Mm-hmm.
are actually visible to people with high levels of awareness in Satya Yuga. So I think in Satya Yuga, and certainly when you're in an advanced state of self-realization, you're almost not physical.
Mm.
That the physical body you do have is so refined and vibrating at such a high level of frequency that it can literally just phase out of being matter and you become astral, and
Mm.
then you can phase back into matter and relate to the world through a material body, and that people are right on that line in that time.
Mm. Such a cool idea. It's interesting how, I don't know if you keep up with the Star Wars movies, but the most recent one that finished off the Luke Skywalker storyline has him doing that basically. He's
Mm-hmm.
physically on a remote island somewhere, and then he physically manifests himself into this other place just long enough to do what he needed to do, and then that effort supposedly killed him. Spoiler.
Yes, or it was just the last act before he uh, phased out like his other
Became like a
Jedi.
force. Yeah,
Yeah,
no longer needed to be in the physical after that.
yeah.
Oh, I like that.
They've decided to be more concrete about what they're phasing out into. I don't know if you've watched any of the um, Ashoka in the animated series.
I haven't. No.
Well, there's an animated series in which she comes and goes. It's not really her series. I forget the name, specific name of the series. But there are a couple of episodes where one of the kind of more advanced characters ends up in between. And he's in this strange kind of featureless somewhere.
Yeah.
It's not a very inviting afterlife, if you ask me. But they've decided to make it to be an actual place, and he encounters other people there. And then in the latest series, that is the Ashoka series, the TV series, she goes there.
Hmm.
And she runs into Anakin,
Huh.
who has now, in a sense, been redeemed by his killing of the Emperor and repenting of his misdeeds. And now he's where all the other Jedi are, and he meets her.
Interesting.
So, as I say, it's not my idea of heaven.
Yeah.
It's a very sterile, cold kind of version of an afterlife, but they're doing it.
Yeah. This is an animated Star Wars, like the Disney's doing?
The animated series that Disney did was the first place they used this notion of the in-between. But in this new series, which is focusing on Ashoka as a character,
Oh, okay.
she was the disciple of Anakin before Anakin became Darth Vader.
Right.
And this new series that features her is live action.
Okay. I remember seeing the advertisement for it, but I haven't watched that yet. Yeah. Yeah, I love watching all these kind of Hollywood movies for multiple reasons, because I feel like the hero's journey is always there. The the positive lesson is always there, but also this is how they, supposedly control people with all this programming. So it's fascinating to study how they use the archetypes and just all kinds of the symbols and everything, and how they try to twist and invert the hero's journey as much as possible. But it seems to always shine through anyway, whether they know it or not. I don't know.
Well, I think an awareness at in some cases, almost non-conscious level, and then more and more with some people, a more conscious level, I think exists an awareness of the astral in our culture today. That even though the average person can't describe it, they will often be drawn to programs, movies, books, fantasy, superhero stuff that really touches on this notion that we're all much more than we think we are, that we are all superheroes in potential, but that we have to go through our hero's journey. We have to go through some sort of process to achieve that. But when we do, there are lots of hints, like with Star Wars and with other programs, that people don't really think anyone dies. Somehow or another, they live on in an energy form or a non-corporeal form. And many of the plots of the old Star Trek programs had some non-corporeal being that had transformed from being a physical being, or an entire species that got to the point where they all transformed. I mean, this theme repeats itself over and over and over in science fiction and in fantasy. And I think it's just somewhere in the subconscious, unconscious, the shared subconscious of people alive today. I think there's this knowledge that we're not just physical beings.
Yeah. It's there for sure. I agree. Well, my friend, I really appreciate you taking the time again. I
My pleasure. I hope we covered the ground you wanted to cover.
absolutely, yeah, definitely did. And I'm like I said last time, I'm looking forward to reading more of your work, and perhaps we can chat about that in the future.
Sure, happy to.
Cool.
Meanwhile, congratulations again.
Thank you.
So it sounds like not only did you get married, but you became a dad.
I'm getting to practice the role of a father. I wouldn't presume to call myself anyone's dad at this point, but
Well, anybody who's raising a child as a dad doesn't care. It doesn't matter where that child come from. You have to do the dad things. So you
I'm
might as well be thinking of yourself as a dad.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I'm doing my best, and it's an absolute joy. Absolute joy. So I have a lot of new appreciation for my siblings that are parents, and for friends that are parents, and certainly for my own parents. I know I was not an easy child.
Well, easy child, you don't really want an easy child because it means that child is too passive, too, just accepting. It's good to have difficult children.
I appreciate that.
And you may be lucky enough to have one.
I hope so. I hope so. We'll see what the plan has for all of us in the next few years.
Yeah.
I think it's gonna be an
Well,
interesting
if
be
there's
alive.
ever a direction you need to go in that requires non-attachment, raising children is that direction.
Oh yeah. The ultimate test, I would imagine.
There's a famous saying, not saying really, just a quote. I'm trying to remember the guy's name. He was kind of a big wiggle in the field of education. He had a PhD, written book after book after book about childhood education and phases of childhood development. And he was like the expert. And he said, I had, before I got married and had children, I had 6 theories of childhood education. After I had 6 children, I have no theories of childhood education. That every child is just so different. And you think there are techniques that you can apply that you can go learn out of a book that will consistently work. And they just don't. I mean, I have 4 kids, and they were so different one from the other that I had to just, make it up as I went along with each child and do my best. But I never felt like I got it. Even once they were grown up, I thought, well, I could maybe do it over and do it better, but I wasn't even sure that that was true. That there are just so many things that they are coming in to this incarnation to learn, right? They're not a child. They're not a physical body going through developmental growth phases. They are a unique being who's bringing in preferences, abilities, knowledge, problems, emotional makeup that is totally unique.
Hmm.
And they look at you and they say, take care of me. Yeah, you'll do it. You'll do a good job. But it is, compared to organizing a work life, we're organizing a work life as a snap compared to tuning into a child and being that source of parental guidance and support and love. Mainly, you just got to love them.
That part's easy. I don't have any
Good.
problem with that. And I definitely appreciate that wisdom. Thank you for sharing that and that perspective. For me,
Well, I
so
basically passed on the fact that I have no wisdom to pass on to you.
that is wisdom, though. Isn't that what Socrates said? Huh? I know nothing.
Yes, all I know is
Comparison of
that I
what is
know
noble.
nothing. Yeah.
Yeah. What's working for me so far, that out of all the things that aren't working, is the things that worked for me when I was focusing on developing my relationship with spirit, which is just staying present
Mhm.
and being genuine and authentic in that present moment, instead of there's a term in psychology, I think, called proximal abandonment, when a parent is physically present but emotionally unavailable. And
Right.
that's the way I was raised, and it's not my parents' fault. That's the way they were raised, and this is a disease that goes back a long way for all of us, but in American culture in particular. But doing my best to not just be there and think that I'm doing a good job just because I'm in the room, be engaged with them as much as possible. And I'm noticing it's a challenge because the technology is such a powerful uh, gravity well for their attention. Once they get into the screen, it's hard to get them out. They don't
All
want to
right.
get out. So, but I also can acknowledge the amazing tool that it is for teaching them about how to interact with the program of the
Right.
matrix. So I think going forward, this child is going to be 3 in December. Going forward, as he becomes older, is helping him see that the difference between the matrix and the present moment. But like you just said, I don't have a plan. It's just this is
Right.
things that I imagine. What can I do to do things differently than the way I was raised with the things I've learned?
Right.
And I'm really
Yeah,
grateful that
I think the gravity well of the screen is a real thing today that I am so happy I did not have to deal with too much. When my kids were in high school, uh, video games were super popular. They spent a lot more time doing it than I would have preferred, but didn't have cell phones. And the whole cell phone world is just another
yeah,
universe that I didn't have to deal with. But the parents that I've seen who seem to meet the challenge the best are the parents who are able to make non-screen time as enjoyable or more enjoyable than screen time.
mm, that's
And getting out in nature with kids, getting them to the beach or getting them in the mountains or getting them walking or playing sports is, a big counterweight to the draw of the screens, I think.
a great point. Yeah. Yeah, it was the same for me. Video games were coming in when I was young, and I was definitely addicted to them, but it wasn't the same interaction as kids have with the phones and the tablets. They're just like right there. And the VRs,
Yeah.
even now it's on their head, they have to hold it.
Yeah.
And of course, Elon wants to make it a chip inside their brain. So
Yeah. Why ever take it off? Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So, but yeah, I'm excited for the opportunity to do it differently. And I'm really grateful to have the opportunity. And I'm also grateful that it didn't come until this time in my life. Even though I wanted to have kids when I was young, I'm glad I didn't, for the opportunity to raise kids in a different way than I would have if I'd stayed in the matrix.
Right.
So
You guys gonna have another?
I'd like to. She's definitely wants to, if for no other reason than for me to have the opportunity to experience what it's like to be a dad, for real. So probably, but who knows?
Yeah.
I've
Well,
passed.
best of luck with it all.
Thank you so much, Joseph. And again, thank you so much for your wisdom and your time. And I really appreciate your work, man. It's amazing, amazing work.
My pleasure.
All right, brother. We'll talk soon.
All right.
Have a good
God
day.
bless.
You too. Thank you.